She doesn't have anything written down. I've been looking at this year. What's on fire?
My side. I said, if I make a mistake, it's because I'm in pain.
All right, good evening. We're going to begin shortly. Please ensure your cell phones are turned off and on silent, and council members, ensure your microphones are turned on. All right, good evening. Today is June 12th, 2023. Today is a regular legislative meeting of Barberton City Council. It is 6:03 p.m. Before we begin our regular legislative meeting, we do have individual committee meetings for this evening. And we will start with City Properties, Parks and Recreation with Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. City Properties and Park Recreation meeting June 12, 2023, Council Chambers. Members present, including myself as chair, Mr. Heidick and Mrs. Fry, other council members present, and also guests are noted. First, request legislation. A letter from Don Patterson, Director of Parks and Recreation, requesting legislation to appropriate $2,593.08 for an unappropriated item of the Barberton Beautification Fund to the Parks Department Operations and Maintenance Fund. Emergency wording requested. Any questions or remarks? Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, what is the increase for? Which project? Because the letter doesn't indicate that.
She did update the letter, and
She only updated the part about what fund to come out of.
that's for the, again, Parks and Operation.
It's for the
Mr. Patterson?
Monk Festival.
Okay, thank you.
The money came from the, our fund at the foundation for the Monk Festival.
Okay. Thank you, Don.
Council members, any questions? Seeing none, motion please.
I'll make that motion.
And I'll second it.
Mr. Heidick, Mrs. Fry, and get a vote please.
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, we have a couple pending legislation, and all three of them are all about the parkland for sale. Has any council members or committee had any concerns or calls from any residents or department heads? Yes.
I've had multiple calls asking why we're leaving it ride. They don't want it to be sold, and they don't understand why, after the Parks Commissioner and Don Patterson expressed that, why we aren't just pulling it. I had about 5 calls asking me that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Griffin?
Yes, Mr. Jaber. My thoughts are the same with Mrs. Coburn, because I've had talking to people, same thing. And they want to know, we all voted for the equipment to go back into the park. Now it's for sale. I can't understand the difference, why we voted one time to replace it in that park, and now it's for sale.
We had a council member, Mr. Heidick, request that, so we want to put it in front of
Is there a reason?
Mr. Heidick?
The reason I even presented them is with the wording that would be on the ballot would be that if the mayor, with council approval, would have the authorization to sell the parks, which would put both the executive branch and the legislative branch, force them to be on the same page. Now, if there was a disagreement between the two branches, nothing would change. It would still remain a park. But the option would be there if both an elected official in the administration and elected representatives found good cause and good reason to move on from those parks. It's not requiring anybody to sell anything. Now, that's only if the citizens were to pass it on the ballot measure.
Mrs. Fry?
But I think everybody's question is why this came out at the time that it did with no discussion with any of us in council, and also the fact that we have a pending piece of legislation to go into contract with DWA for the purchase of the equipment for the park. Now, this, you know, if it would pass and the park is sold, there's no place to put it. And the Parks Commission has already said that it should go back to College Park. And also, there was no discussion about either of the other parks either. So I just don't understand why you would bring this out after we got the legislation on April 28th regarding the fact that Mr. Patterson wanted to go into contract to purchase the new playground equipment. And also, I'm on the Parks Committee, and I did not get a letter or any notification that this was going forward. And if you would look at rules, Rule 301 that is listed on our sheet that tells us the cutoff dates for the 2023 requests, it was requested on May the 5th, which would mean that it would be at the Committee of the Whole meeting on the 15th. However, Parks met on the 8th. So therefore, it didn't, you know, have the 10-day rule. And I do know that we have late legislation at times. However, so many parts of Rule 301 were not followed, saying that the chair, did you get a letter, Sean?
Letter 4.
For this legislation?
In the email, we got email.
Yeah, I got the email on May the 8th.
Right.
Your name is not even on the email, Sean. The names on the email that we received are none of the members of the Parks Committee, which is part of what you're supposed to do when you request legislation. The names on the request were for Renee Fox, Lisa Miller, Laura Reese-Price, and Justin Greer. And you left out the entire committee. So is this request even valid?
That would be a question for the president, for legal, for our clerk.
Well, we can go down that route, but I will say it's going to be a hard route to go down. The majority of legislation coming from the administration is the same, so.
What is that?
We're doing a lot of times.
Even
people are not
if it
count-
is, I'm sorry for interrupting, but even if it is requested by the department, we normally get a letter telling
Sure.
us what the legislation is, rather than pending approval from the law department. I mean, it doesn't say anything about the Board of Control or the sale of the parks. It's just a very simple email.
So after this was brought up, I got with Lori, we've talked about seeing where issues in the process have failed. We're sending out new reminders on who all needs to be included on requests for legislation. You give that face, but I'm telling you, a lot of times people are not included on this, and Lori, our clerk, has to make sure that they get included. Or a lot of times they might not get included. So there's issues that we are addressing. So to ask if this is even valid, I think so. We're getting a plan to address this more on the higher level in the legislative. And I've already instructed Lori to be more strict and deny requests that are not flat out deny requests that are not proper.
Change law?
Mr. Jaber, if I can address Mr. Heidi?
Yes, ma'am.
So, Mr. Heidi, you've been on council how many years?
4.
Okay, and you are, how long have you been on the Parks Committee? 2 years? 4 years?
All 4.
Okay, so pretty much you know who's on the Parks Committee. So it's not like I'm a new person and I don't know. It looks as though you made sure that certain people got that, and our council president, but not Mr. Jaber, who is our Parks chairperson, and not Mrs. Fry, who is on there. So I can't stand behind our president saying that, well, it was a slip or something like that. You know what committee that you're on. I think all of us know what committee that we're on. And it was on Friday, May 8th. And
May 5th.
we got word of it on Monday. So, my first question is, why did you eliminate 2 people out of 3 people that's on the Parks Commission? And what date was the original letter? Is there a 10-day rule? Was there not a 10-day rule? Because it shouldn't have actually appeared until May 15th if you're looking at a 10-day rule. And I don't remember us invoking that 10-day rule on this, or getting permission from the law director to invoke that rule. So that's one of the questions, It's just not, this is a big deal. You want to sell property, but you eliminated 2 people out of 3 people on your committee. And did you invoke the 10-day rule? Or, because I think this should be withdrawn because of the council rules that we have, that you were on the Rules Committee, Mr. Griffin, Mr. Heidig, and Mr. Jaber. You're on that committee. So I would think you would know the rules, probably, I know better than me. So I'm kind of confused on, we're just going to slip and slide. We're going to slip this thing through and hope that it slides through. Well, it's all wrong, because you did not
Follow procedure.
procedure. The first rule, 301, a letter. I mean, that email's dated May 5th. That's not, and then we met May 8th. So there's some questions, and I think that, that this is an appropriate way to handle this, along with the city charter, 601B. And I had called out. I called out the chair of the Parks Committee, Parks Commission. He didn't know anything about it. Mr. Patterson didn't know anything about it until Monday afternoon. And the mayor knew nothing about it. So why, with this magnitude of the legislation, why didn't you just CC everybody? Why did you not CC Mr. Jaber, Mr. Fry, Mrs. Fry on this piece of legislation? And why didn't you follow Rule 301?
Mr. Hyde?
Thank you, Chair. If I'm not mistaken, the rule says, the 10-day rule is 10 days before committee of the whole, not the actual committee. Am I correct, Mr. President?
Correct.
Okay, that answers that question. Second of all, I referred it to legal because it is a ballot issue, and without the legal approval, then it's all moot anyway. Number 3, I CC'd the president and the clerk because according to the council rules, once something is cleared, it is the president's duty to notify or to assign to what committee. Being a ballot issue, does it go to Parks or does it go to Rules?
Parks?
But it's going to be a ballot issue. So that's up to the president to decide if there's a question, which committee to assign it. So I do believe, Mr. President, am I correct in saying I am within the rules of the 10-day with my request?
You are within the 10 days. I'm looking at it, May 5th at 6:30 or 6:53 a.m. 4 attachments were sent via email. So you are within the 10 days. However, I am looking at it. Renee Fox, Mrs. Miller, Mrs. Price, and myself were the only ones included on that email.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Rule 301, request for legislation from members or city administration. Rule 301A, letter. A member or city administrator requesting legislation shall submit a letter to the chair of the appropriate committee with copies to each committee member, council president, and the clerk. So, if you weren't sure, because it's Parks, that it went to Parks, and Mr. Greer, our president, wasn't sure, then up here would tell me you send it out to everybody. So everybody's on the same page. And that is not what happened. And I think that's in violation. You could have, I mean, if you're selling Parks, it would go to Parks. If it was wrong, May 8th, when we had, it was showed up on May 8th. Why was a 10-day rule? I don't get that. Somebody will have to explain that to me, because May 5th and Parks met on May 8th. If that was the case, we shouldn't have, he should have had that in legislation. Hold that back, matters referred, until May 15th. But because May 8th, the Parks met, therefore, you just forget about the 10-day rule? It could have waited. I mean, I've had correspondence that waited 2 or 3 weeks because streets didn't meet on that week, and I had to wait till the next week. So, it shouldn't have met on May 8th. It should have waited till May 15th, or the next week, which would have been May 25th. Because May 8th, from your letter to this, is not 10 days. And any way you want to look at it, you can't make 10 days into 2 days or 3 days.
Mr. Hyde?
Thank you, sir. I tell you this, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I ask you to ask legal if this is all valid, if there is any misstep, if there is anything in violation, and if legal says there's any sort of violation to our rules, or there is any type of misstep to it, then I will respectfully withdraw it. But I ask the both of you, as the president and as the chairman, to refer it to legal, and barring their opinion, I will agree to whatever they rule.
If you are saying that Mr. Greer made the decision to put it in Parks, is that what I heard?
Yes.
I'm saying in the rules, if there's any confusion, then it is on the president to send it somewhere. Being a ballot issue, does that go to rules, or does that go to
So,
Parks?
nobody, here's, none of us, no one but you, Lisa Miller, Justin Greer, and
Lori.
Lori, or was it Renee?
Yeah, Renee was on it too.
So you guys made a decision to do something with no council representative, not even on Parks, and you're putting it that Mr. Greer put it in Parks. Is that correct? You put it in Parks, Mr.
If I
Greer?
recall, yeah. Right. It doesn't say in the email when they request where it needed to go. It just says pending approval from law department, I'm submitting these legislation requests. This was on May 5th. And I'm requesting 3 readings and no emergency language. So when that came in, we referred it to Parks.
Thank you.
However, Mr. Heidick is correct that in the rules it states that if there's confusion, however, it wasn't really stated in here nor implied that it didn't know where to go. So again, it's an issue that we're looking at. We've looked at it. I've talked
Well, at
with our
this
clerk
point,
about it.
pardon me, but at this point, referring it to legal will be at least 2 more weeks, which will be the 3rd reading. So it ends up being
Sure.
what they want anyway, so.
Yeah. So we've identified the issues in the process. We can beat this to death if you guys would like. I could check for it being pulled. The earliest we'd probably know is next week. However, we do this, it's a slippery slope because I will be going back probably 6 months on all legislation requests and requesting rescinding from everybody. We can't just hold it because we don't like it. it is what it is. So moving forward, we've brought a process. I've already talked to our clerk about ensuring that everybody's copied on everything. And I know we'd like, our clerk is nice. She knows where things need to be forwarded to if someone's not included on it. However, with the loss of Mrs. Fox in the legal department, we need to be very strict about it. So we've trying to mitigate these type of issues in the future.
Mrs. Angel?
It says, "Good day all, pending approval from the law department." So I'd just like to know how soon before May 5th that this was pending in the law department, that you talked to the law department about it. Was it that day, Mr. Heidi?
Thank you, Chair. When I sent it to him, I expected an answer, yes or no, because again, once it's a ballot issue, if there's any miswording or anything, it becomes a moot point and everything's lost anyway.
Can I redirect? Thank you, Mr. Jaber. You've been very kind with letting us go. No, your email said, pending approval from the law department. That's dated May 5th. A pending approval. So that tells me prior to Friday, May 5th is when this was put together? Okay, so explain a pending approval from the law department. I am submitting these legislation requests. So when was your request submitted to the law department?
Mr. Heidi?
Thank you, Chair. It was submitted on that email, and pending their approval, if they did not approve of it, it would not go forward.
I don't see the approval, though. I don't see the answer.
The approval was them letting it go forward.
All right.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes, sir, Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Heidi, you still haven't told me why. You haven't told me why. Why you want to sell it? What do you want to do? You want to repurpose it to something else? I want to know what you want to do. If it goes to the ballot and passes, what are you going to do? What do you want to do with it?
Sure.
Mr. Heidi?
Thank you, Chair. What I would like to see, and which is why I wanted to word the ballot that way, is that it would be a cohesive decision for the betterment of those pieces of land. Let's say the mayor had an idea and us as councilors didn't agree with that idea, then it doesn't go forward. If a councilor proposes an idea and the mayor doesn't sign off on it, it doesn't go forward. It would remain a park if it passed, because it's not forcing the hand to sell. What it's doing is giving an option to two different branches of government to come together if there's a viable option to move forward. If there's no viable option for the next 10 years, then it remains a park for 10 years. If a nonprofit decides, I would like to purchase this park and here's my plan for it, the mayor presents it and we agree it's a good idea, we could move forward. If the mayor accepts a proposal and we decide that's probably not in the best interest of that neighborhood, then it doesn't move forward, and it would still remain a park. It would remain a park until both sides agree on a proposal for it. It's not the end-all, be-all that if this went to the ballot and passed, that it's a foregone conclusion that it would be sold. What it does is it gives the city an option to move on from a park or to keep it as a park. We could still agree to keep it as a park, but the option in 15 years, if the park is no longer valid, would be there. It's, like I said, it's not as soon as the election's certified mid-December, we're gonna go running for the horses to see who can buy it. What we're doing is safeguarding if we want to repurpose those 3 parks, or we want to move forward for them, or we want to keep them as they are and make them better. We have every option on the table, instead of being handcuffed to them forever.
Are you saying right now, what about the neighborhood now? You're throwing the neighborhood under the bus. The neighborhood doesn't want the park sold. They don't even want it discussed. They don't even want it on the ballot. So why are you going against the neighborhood right now? That's what I want to know. Why? For their best interest? Who decides that?
Chair.
Yes, sir. Mr. Heidi?
Thank you, Chair. The people would decide that. The people could come out and vote it down.
Mrs. Frye?
But at the same time, we have a pending piece of legislation that the Parks Commission has agreed on, that we should put the park equipment back in College Park. That's why I can't understand, we have 16 parks. So out of 16 parks, you handpicked College, which has some pending legislation revolving around it, and then Harder and Conrad, which there really isn't an issue there. However, there are issues because we don't know how they could be repurposed. That is something that should be open for discussion for all of us to decide based on knowing people in the neighborhoods, how much use it gets, what goes on in those parks. That should be the determining factor, not, oh, I think that we'll sell College and let's throw in Harder and Conrad as well, when no one has ever discussed it. And I am worried about the pending piece of legislation, because to get the extra money, the gap, they do put
Limitations.
limitations, yes, thank you, Joyce, limitations on how long you can sit on this and decide what you're going to do. So that's my point.
Mrs. Thompson?
Thank you, Chair. I kind of agree with Mrs. Fry. I think it would be better if we had a plan first. That way we could tell residents, like, hey, we're thinking about selling the park because this is what we want to do with it. And then we could get the support behind it.
Mrs. Randall?
I just want to know how College Park got involved with Harder and Conrad, because, as we said, we had legislation April 28th for the playground equipment. So how did it get flipped, like we're going to add it to sell, when we're already wanting to put playground equipment back there? So how did College Park get part of Harder Park that nobody plays in, and Conrad Park that nobody knows where it's at? So how did that get in this piece of legislation when we already had a piece of legislation? The money was already appropriated in February. So who made that decision to add College Park? And don't tell me attractive nuisance, because we can point out other ones that have a retention pond, that their playground burned down and got a new playground, and some other parks that had vandalism that was replaced. And growing up, there was projects over there. A lot of the kids that we went to school with after World War II, they lived there. There was no fence around there. The fence was put up there much later. So it's why College Street? We already had we already did one piece of legislation appropriating the money, so why was it put on again?
Mrs. Bailey, you got something?
I just want to state, listening to the parks,
Commissioner.
Yeah, yeah.
That was the title.
Mhm, yeah, Mr. Hardy.
Just from my perspective, not being a part of the committee, it was very disheartening to hear someone who has dedicated their passion of serving on that committee, A, having no idea, B, being totally against it. Not being a part of the committee and being, part of the council, that was just a bit disheartening that he, and Mr. Patterson were completely blindsided by this. I'm not going to bring up things that have happened in the past in a different council. There have been several things that have happened where I myself have been blindsided, and I respect each and every one of you and the people who are on these commissions and volunteer their time or whatnot. It was just a bit disheartening in the manner. I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent. You feel the way you do for a reason, and I respect that. I respect your ideas and your thoughts. It's just some of the ways of going about things, and we can agree to disagree, are not thoughtful. And that's just...
All right, I think,
My last question.
go ahead, Mr. Griffin, then we'll just go ahead
This
and
is the last one. Okay, Chrisman, Brightenstein, both had playgrounds equipment burnt down, correct? They were replaced at both of those parks, right? Now, I want you to tell me the difference between College Park and Bredenstein and Christmas. That's it.
Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Chair. Director Eisman, do you have a traffic count for the road that Breitenstein and the 4 roads that surround Chrisman versus Snyder Avenue?
I do not.
Would it be in your opinion that the traffic is a lot less heavy and a lot less traversed in Breitenstein being a dead end, and the 4 side streets that surround Chrisman would be significantly lower than Snyder?
Yes, they would.
Thank you.
What about the retention pond? That just goes, that's there.
I appreciate you guys' time and questions and opinions on these 3 matters. So now I'm gonna open this up for miscellaneous discussion. Mrs. Thompson?
I just have a question real
Yes,
quick. When's the next park commission meeting? Because it's not on the calendar.
Mr.
It
Patterson?
was this past Wednesday, I think.
Yeah, I do too.
Past Thursday.
Thursday, it was this past Thursday.
Okay. And secondly, I just want to tell everybody know that the citywide basketball tournament that was set to take place in the parks this week has been canceled. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Any other questions or concern? Miscellaneous? All right. Oh, I see you, Mrs. Fry.
That's okay. I know this won't happen, but I was wondering if our committee would consider doing a suspension on the sale of the parks so that we could vote now, and therefore the DWA contract could move forward. Or do you want to wait for the third reading?
Yes, ma'am. Mr.
Chair.
Mr. Heidick?
Given the state of affairs, if the chair pleases, I'd be willing to suspend tonight.
I'm going to wait on the 3 readings. I appreciate your concern. So I'm going to decide to keep on the 3 readings. All right, seeing no more miscellaneous discussion?
And excuse me, if the person brought it forward says he's willing, why are you not?
I am the chair and it's my decision. So I appreciate
Okay,
it.
you're holding us hostage.
Majority?
Mr. Greer?
Is it majority?
That
chair-
statement was not needed. She said holding us hostage.
May not be, but it's the truth.
It's allowed. It's not slander or anything.
It is out of line though. So I mean, for future reference, out of respect, I think you should tell her to tone it down. Thank you. All right, seeing none, no more miscellaneous discussion, a motion to adjourn, please.
I'll make that motion.
And I'll second it.
All right. And we are adjourned at 6:34.
Thank you, Mr. Jaber.
You're welcome.
Next up, Public Welfare and Safety with Mrs. Fry.
Don't scare me.
I'm sorry.
You don't scare me. Stop
All right,
looking at me like that.
order.
What is he talking about? I don't scare.
Order. That's it, Robert.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is Monday, June the 12th. The time is 6:35 PM. We are in council chambers. All members of my committee are present, as well as other council members, all of our council members, and guests as noted on my sheet. The committee is made up of myself as the chair, Shorter Griffin, and Joyce Coburn as members of the committee. We have one request for legislation tonight. It is a letter from Robert Incavati, Court Administrator, requesting legislation to enter into contract with U.S. Royce Protection Service, FKA Tenable Protection, for a one-year period from July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2024. Emergency wording requested, and our request, it is attached. Does all the committee have it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I was looking at the contract myself and saw that the 2022 rates were $21 per hour for regular hours and $31.50 per hour for holiday hours. I wasn't here today, so I did not get to call Mr. Incavati, but I did ask Mrs. Eisman, and she was unable to get in touch with him. So I will have a rate for you the next time that we meet before we would vote on it, if you're willing to vote on it at this point, to get it out of committee.
I think we need to because ends June
Yeah,
30th.
yeah, I know.
So-
It's kind of
I will call for it
a
if that's
timely
what
issue.
you're asking.
Yes, thank
And
you.
we can get the.
Motion made by Mrs. Coburn. Do I have a second?
A second.
Seconded by Mr. Griffin. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. We have no pending legislation. However, I'll open it up for any miscellaneous discussion that anyone has regarding safety, public welfare and safety. Yes, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Chair. In the agreement, is there a difference for the rate of pay? And I'm not saying they should be, but it does specify that they are unarmed. Is there a difference of pay scale if we were to arm them? I'm just curious that, because it says unarmed in there versus an armed security guard.
I really don't know. However, I don't think that we do want armed security because we do have the police department right here. And maybe Mrs. Eisman could speak on that.
I raised my hand because I did hear from Mr. Incarvati.
Oh, okay, thank you.
The current rate is $19.54 an hour, and the proposed rate is $21 an hour.
1954?
Is what the current rate is.
Oh, okay, so,
And they're proposing 21.
okay, so it was just under
Correct,
the
it was
wrong.
wrong, just had the wrong
Okay,
year.
thank you so
Okay,
much.
yeah.
And do you know about the armed and unarmed? I don't,
I don't.
Mayor Judge?
I would have to assume that armed security would be much more expensive since they have to get certified with the certification.
And probably carry some kind of liability or insurance or what have you? Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Anybody from the gallery? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Okay. And do I have a second?
He said he did.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. And we are adjourned at 6:39.
Thank you, Mrs. Fry. Next up is Rules Marketing Development, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to call this meeting to order today, May 22nd. It's 6:39 with Marketing Development. All members of my committee are present, and all others as noted. Today, we don't have any requests for legislation or pending legislation. Do we have any miscellaneous discussion for rules?
I have none.
We have none? Yes, sir.
I just want to state, Mrs. Angela said I was on the committee, on the rules. I am now on the rules committee. Mrs. Thompson is. Just wanted,
Oh, I thought February 2023. Did they change after that? Well, there's a typo,
just want to clarify
because
that.
your name's on it.
Oh, no worries, thank you.
Chair.
Yes, Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Chair. You were the last legislative session with me, so that's probably the typo there. Because the rules as they're printed has the committee on that.
Okay, the last one, right.
Okay,
So it's typo?
thank you. Do we have anything from the gallery or from the body? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Taylor.
I will second that.
Thank you, Ms. Hyde. So we are adjourned at 6:42. Put that out, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Next up, City Utilities with Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to call to order the city utilities, June 12th, 2023. Council chambers, all members are present, all others are noted, and guests as on my sheet. We received a letter from Denny Weaver, Utilities Director, requesting legislation to authorize the mayor to enter into a professional engineering services contract with CT Consultants for additional construction administration, construction inspection, and environmental assistance support services for the Brentwood Package Plant Elimination Project in an amount not to exceed $118,700. Emergency wording is requested. This was due to overruns in time due to the pandemic that put things out of sorts, and they ended up having to have this extra money to finish that project up. Are there any questions about this from the council? Do I have a motion to call for this?
I'll make a I'm sorry. I'll make a motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have a letter from Caroline Crawford, Stormwater Manager, requesting legislation to appropriate $348,158.67 from the unappropriated item of the FEMA fund to the stormwater capital budget to reimburse expenses related to the hazard mitigation grant program. Emergency wording is requested, and we'll be referring this to finance. Does everyone understand about the FEMA fund and the property purchases? Does anyone have any questions? Do I have a motion to call for this?
I'll make a motion.
And I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We have no pending legislation. Is there any miscellaneous discussion for utilities? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
We are adjourned at 6:43.
Thank you, Mr. Coburn. Last but not least, Finance Personnel with Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance and Personnel, it is 6:43 on Monday, June 12th, 2023. We're in council chambers. The committee is present, which consists of Councilors Coburn, Thompson, President Greer, myself as chair, all others noted. We save requests for committee of the whole nights. The next, though, we have the approval of the financial report for the month of May 2023. Director Flaker, would you care to entertain us with the numbers?
All right, starting off with the healthcare fund. For the month of May, revenues were just shy of $400,000. Our expenditures were $363,000. It gives us a net year-to-date of a negative $177,000. But as the year goes on, that negative will go down to hopefully be a positive come the end of this year. Moving forward to the income tax fund, the estimate for the month of May was a little over $1.3 million. Our actuals came in at $1.8 million. That puts us over our estimate by a little over $1.1 million. Looking at that, part of that money that's in for May is from our, I guess the best word for it would be the true up with RETA. So throughout the year, RETA holds a flat 3% from us for their administration fees. And then at the end of the year, they'll go back and look, see how much they actually collected for the city, what they collected as RETA entirely for all the communities they serve, their operational costs, and break it out as a percentage of that. That actually broke out to being a little over 1% up cost to us. So they gave us back, essentially, it was about $270,000 right there. So RETA is definitely coming in cheaper operational cost-wise than CCA was for us. So that is a benefit. We did transfer $1.5 million from the income tax fund to the general fund. So it gives us about $5.8 million left to transfer between this month through the end of the year to the general fund to fulfill the transfer in the original budget. Forwarding to statement of cash receipts and disbursement, couple funds in the negative. It's the traditional funds, the FEMA fund, which is the flood mitigation grants, and the CDBG fund, both federally funded program grants, that once we pay for the expenditures, they'll reimburse us back. The next fund in the negative is the health insurance fund, and that is only due to the encumbrances outstanding for the city's healthcare costs that we have to pay to Summit County every month. As time goes on, that negative will get smaller and become a positive here probably in the next, probably about 2-3 months. That should become a positive number for us. Moving on to the last 3 months of activity, you'll notice the general fund did go up, but that has a lot to deal with the net transfers going up. I mean, we transferred $600,000 more this month than we did in the previous months. And then our expenditures also went down from last month to this month. So combine those two things, that is what's driving that increase. Special revenue funds, you'll notice that did go down. A lot of that is coming from the encumbrances outstanding. That went up by almost 1.8 million. That's driving almost all of that $2.1 million difference from last month to this month. And not only that, we did have the largest transfer this month as well to the general fund. Enterprise funds to state went up about 300,000. That is just, a lot of that has to deal with the encumbrances outstanding going down. And then all other funds, it did get out of the negative, and it's at a positive 254,000, and that will continue to grow as the year goes on. Comparing last May to this May, you'll notice general fund went up. A lot of that has to deal with us charging the wages for police and fire to revenue loss of ARPA funds. So that number should be changing here soon. I can't remember the exact month we did that chargeback, so that should be in the next month or two. So those numbers should be getting closer together. Actually, wouldn't it surprise me if the 2023 number will come in less than the 2022 number here soon. Special revenue funds is down by about 4.2 million, 4.3 million. Once again, has to deal with the ARPA funds. Enterprise funds is down slightly. A lot of that has to deal with paying off some of the debt that we had in those funds. And then all other funds is up by about 220,000. Any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Director. Do I have a motion to call for the approval?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Those in favor?
Aye.
Is there any miscellaneous discussion from the committee?
I have nothing.
From the body?
No.
From the gallery? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. And we are adjourned at 6:49.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick. That concludes our individual committee meetings for this evening. Let's take a 5-minute breather, and we'll come back and begin the regular legislative meeting. All right, good evening, everybody. If you could silence your cell phones or turn them off, and council members, ensure your microphones are turned on. All right, today is a regular legislative meeting of Barberton City Council. It is Monday, June 12th, 2023. I call this meeting to order at 7:03 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by the Girl Scout Troop 662 and 652, followed by invocation by Mrs. Angela.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Heavenly Father, we ask that you guide us in having a successful meeting by helping us use our best skills in judgment. Give us the freedom to speak the truth boldly and with kindness. Give us patience to listen openly. Give us confidence to acknowledge what is right and to explore all new possibilities. Lord, we pray that you bring healing and strength to our families and to our community with those who are ill and hungry. Bless our leaders, safety forces, military, city employees, and our children. In God's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Clerk, please call the roll.
President Greer.
Present.
Mr. Heidick.
Here.
Mrs. Thompson.
Here.
Mrs. Bailey. Here. Mrs. Angela.
Here.
Mr. Griffin.
Here.
Mr. Jaber.
Here.
Mrs. Coburn.
Here.
Mrs. Fry.
Here.
Thank you. Approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, May 22nd, 2023. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, May 2nd, 2023.
May 2nd,
May,
22nd.
I said 22nd, didn't I?
No, 2nd.
22nd.
Thank you.
Got the second one, right?
Is there a second? Mrs. Thompson.
Yep, thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mr. Heidick's motion to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, May 22nd, 2023.
That's incorrect. Sorry.
Okay.
Wait, it is in. All right, it is correct.
Yep,
Looking at the
it
wrong
was
thing.
my
Thank you.
birthday.
It was moved by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, May 22nd, 2023, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are adopted. Petitions and claims. Okay, matters requested? Thank you. Citizens addressing council. We do have one addressing council today. When I call your name, please step up to the podium. You have 5 minutes. Please state your name, address, and reason for speaking. And you have 5 minutes. And Ms. Street.
Good evening. Zion Street, 649 Mesa Verde Drive, Barberton, Ohio. And I come forward to you about the parks, especially in the 3rd Ward. We're trying desperately to unite our children, especially since after the pandemic. They need a place to go so they can try to stay out of trouble. We know that there's a lot going on out there. If we can gather them together, have them a place to stay, to play, to enjoy themselves, to get out, period, they can enjoy themselves. I petition you because it seems like we go over and over this very situation, over these parks, when you just, there's no reason for it, at least that's my feeling anyway, for us to keep battling, trying to save our parks. if nothing else, you try to help us build that park up so that these children will come and enjoy themselves. So I ask you once again about the parks, if you would be so kind as to pass it so we can keep these parks, have a place for our young children, all children, to go and exercise some of that energy that they have. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Street. There are no more citizens addressing council, so first reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Resolution number 80-2023, presented by Mrs. Angela. Title, amend resolution number 40-2023, ODOT. An ordinance amending resolution number 40-2023 by increasing the amount of the contract with ODOT to $345,923 based on bids that ODOT received higher than the estimated cost and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Bailey?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Angeloff's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff and seconded by Mrs. Bailey to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of Resolution 80-2023.
Thank you. Mrs. Bailey?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Angeloff's motion on adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff and seconded by Mrs. Bailey to adopt resolution number 80-2023. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 81-2023, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, Adoption of the Lake Anna Study. An ordinance adopting the Lake Anna Study to assist with ideas and plans for future improvements of Lake Anna Park.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Angela?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion for suspension.
Thank you. A motion is made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mrs. Angeloff to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 81-2023.
Thank you. Mrs. Angela?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion on adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mrs. Angeloff to adopt ordinance number 81-2023. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
Resolution number 82-2023, presented by Mrs. Angela. Title, Preliminary Participatory Legislation, Worcester Road, 31st Street, Hudson Run Road, 2nd Street, Northwest. A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into contract with the Ohio Department of Transportation, ODOT, for the purpose of resurfacing and reconstruction of Worcester Road from 31st Street to Hudson Run Road and Hudson Run Road to 2nd Street Northwest in the city of Barberton, SUM Worcester Road West, PID 108240, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Bailey?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Angeloff's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion is made by Mrs. Angeloff and second by Mrs. Bailey to suspend the rules as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number 82-2023.
Thank you. Mrs. Bailey?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Angeloff's motion on adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Angeloff and second by Mrs. Bailey to adopt resolution number 82-2023. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey? Mr.
Yes.
Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion for adoption carries. We got it.
So sorry.
Ordinance number 83-2023, presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, enter into contract, Weichert Insurance Company. An ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into contract with Weichert Insurance Company for property, vehicle, equipment, and liability insurance in the amount of $396,331 and approximately $38,000 increase from last year and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second that motion for suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 83-2023 be adopted.
Thank you. Mrs. Coburn?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second Mr. Heidick's motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 83-2023. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes.
Mrs. Frye?
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
This ends the first reading.
Second reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 77-2023, presented by Mr. Jaber. Title, Purchase of Parkland. An ordinance to provide for an election in order to permit the sale of the City of Barberton College Park and for giving notice thereof. This is the second reading. The first reading was on Monday, May 22nd, 2023, and the third reading will be on Monday, June 26th, 2023. Ordinance number 78-2023, presented by Mr. Jaber. Title, Purchase of Parkland. An ordinance to provide for an election in order to permit the sale of the City of Barberton, Harder Park, and for giving notice thereof. This is the second reading. The first reading was on Monday, May 22nd, 2023, and the third reading will be on Monday, June 26th, 2023. Ordinance number 79-2023, presented by Mr. Jaber. Title, Purchase of Parkland. An ordinance to provide for an election in order to permit the sale by the City of Barberton, Conrad Park, and for giving notice thereof. This is the second reading. The first reading was on Monday, May 22nd, 2023, and the third reading will be on Monday, June 26th, 2023. This ends the second reading.
Third reading of ordinances and resolutions.
There are none.
Miscellaneous and unfinished business.
We have an appointment to the Board of Health, Siobhan Hicks, to begin immediately to fill an unexpired term ending December 31st, 2027.
Thank you. Well, do I have a motion to appoint Ms. Hicks? Ms. Bailey?
I will make a motion to appoint Mrs. Hicks.
Thank you. Is there a second? Mr. J?
Oh, second, Mrs. Bailey. appointment.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Bailey and seconded by Mr. Jaber to appoint Mrs. Hicks to the board, our Barberton Board of Health. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And the motion for the appointment carries. Miscellaneous and unfinished business. Is there anything from department heads? All right, communication from the body. Anything? Mrs. Angela?
I just want to say, you guys were talking about May 22nd, and every one of the ordinances I dated May 22nd
Yeah.
instead of June 12th.
That's why I was getting confused.
It
Plus,
gets
we
in
had
your
a
mind
week
and you
off.
can't get it out, yes.
Yes. Is there anything else from council? Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. With Resolution 82, 2023, with the Worcester Road going basically from 2nd Street to 31st Street, I just want to remind everybody, because I know things get lost in the shuffle and forgotten, but just in a few short years, that's a long stretch of road. We're going to have that. We had Norton Avenue, 2nd Street Southwest. We're about to have a huge Van Buren project, already a piece of Worcester. 4th Street and that ridiculous island out of Robinson Bridge that Councilor Angeloff loves so much. But these are main roads. In just a few short years, we've been able to get these things done and still have some to do side streets. These main streets are driven quite a bit, and once they're paved, everybody loves them that day and forgets them the next. So I just wanted a gentle reminder that these roads are getting done. Thank you.
Yeah. Mrs. Angela?
And the railroad tracks there on South Second.
Yes.
Those are going to be done too. And we've had complaints about that, so it's a big project.
True that.
I just got
Mr. Griffin.
Mr.
President.
This Saturday, June 17th, the Heart of Christ Ministries will have a community picnic. And it'll start about 12 o'clock noon, and it's at the corner of Stanley and Frank Avenue in South Barberton. And they would like to have donations of books. If anybody has children's books or inspirational books, they would like to donate it to them. It would be well appreciated. So come out and spend some time. It's free.
Mr. Griffin, could you share the date and time?
17th. June 17th, that will be Saturday.
At noon.
At noon. At noon. Mhm. And Mrs. Iceman has so graciously had the boys in blue. They're going to block the streets off, so we'll be safe.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Is there anything else from council members? I have, I guess, two things. First off, I want to say a healthy debate is a good debate, but let's make sure we keep it inside the lines. And next thing is, our next council meeting is June 20th. It's a Tuesday due to the Juneteenth, and that'll be a committee of the whole. With nothing else from anybody, Mayor, communication from the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to start off by thanking all the residents who came out for the open office hours I held this past weekend. See a lot of questions, a lot of feedback, a lot of things on social media. So despite residents do come out, there's a lot more of residents who I wish would come out. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of negative things based on misinformation and inaccuracies that is out there on social media. And here I'm giving up several hours on a Saturday to communicate with residents, and it'd be nice if some of those residents would come out. And you don't have to believe what I say or anything, but I can back it up with facts, and at least you can go out and say, this came out of the mayor's mouth on this date. So we'll continue doing this, and did get some great feedback from some of the residents who did come out. And I think it's worthwhile, and we're going to continue doing it. So this Wednesday, the 14th, is Flag Day, so make sure you put your flag out. Should be out all the time, but make sure it's out at least on this Wednesday. This past weekend, John Kaminsky, Barbertonian, held his football camp at the stadium. Great weather, great turnout, a lot of youth, a lot of little girls out there showing the boys how to play football, which was great to see. Obviously, John was there as well. So just a good example of what Barberton is here in the community. So Change for this month will be at Durbin's Magic Freeze on June 29th, benefiting Barberton Youth Football and Youth Cheer. So that'll be from 4:30 till 7. I appreciate Utilities Committee approving the FEMA reimbursement to the storm capital budget in committee today. So this is all stems from the 14th Street, 15th Street, and Arthur Avenue FEMA project that's been going on for several years surrounding stormwater mitigation. This is a huge step forward. I know when I was on council and speaking to former mayors, you know, it was hard to get the attention of FEMA. And if you think about it from their world, we have repetitive flooding. You know, 10 feet of water in your basement and things like that is not any situation that anyone wants to live in, but FEMA deals with much bigger issues where there's loss of life, right? Loss of property. So we were able to get their attention, and this is, I think, the 3rd or 4th year involved with them. A lot of paperwork, a lot of hard work has gone into it, and we're starting to see that reimbursement come through, so this was great. Huge step forward. I want to give a few stats. You know, I've talked to a few of the council members about property maintenance, about high grass. And, you know, we always get the calls around now for the high grass and property maintenance issues. So from May 1st to June 1st, the building department brought in just over $26,000 in building permits. The property maintenance inspector cited over 220 violations for property maintenance. Now that includes grass. And there's a process, there's a legal process to follow on citing people for property maintenance and with grass. And so we follow that. We follow it very strictly. Our inspectors are out there really working. So over 220 violations just in that month period. So I'll keep you updated as we go through this. You know, it kind of goes up and down. But this summer we're going to be very, very busy with all these projects. Whether it's basic operations that we're doing, day-to-day operations, or it's some of these major projects that we have going on. Talking about AMATS funding. So, you know, very important, and thank you for bringing that up. There's a lot that has come through City Council in terms of the AMATS projects. From 1977 to 2011, the city received about $7.7 million in AMATS funding. From 2012 to what we've been approved for and just haven't received yet, it's well over $17 million. So we've really taken, you know, leveraged taxpayer money here for federal grant money that was going somewhere, you know, and it's competitive. So it's very, very difficult to get the money. A lot of hard work has gone into it, but we're getting our fair share, or we're starting to get our fair share. And you're starting to see it pay off. And this summer is going to be a testament to that hard work, and those programs and that funding that was approved 5 or 6 years ago is now coming due now. And we kind of joke, but I'm already getting complaints. We kind of joke that people are going to stop complaining about potholes and start complaining about detours and orange barrels. Kind of joke about that, but I'm getting complaints about detours and things of that nature. But in the end, people will love it in the beginning, forget about the next day. You know, talk about Van Buren, South Van Buren. Well, North Van Buren was a recipient of federal funds. Robinson Avenue, State Street, East and West, parts of Worcester Road North. You name it, we've tried to do everything we can. West Hopkins downtown and now the next section. So a lot of money flowing in from the federal government. A lot of hard work has gone into that, and so I appreciate council bringing that up. But if there's any questions on any of that as we continue to move forward, please let me know. As Council President Greer said, next Monday we're off for Juneteenth, so we'll be meeting on Tuesday the 20th. And just lastly, happy Father's Day to all the hardworking fathers out there, and especially to the women who have assumed the role of father and stepped into that position. So hats off to everybody for Father's Day coming up this weekend. Are there any questions? I'm not going to sing, so. Yes.
I have a question. How much damage was done in the city from the storm? Was there a lot? Because we came home this afternoon and there's a tree all the way across Taylor Road, And then on 37th, there was something else going on at a crane over there. And I was wondering if just our area got hit or if it was citywide.
You know, we typically always get a few trees down here or there, kind of just your area. So some of the trees you mentioned, you know, we were looking into this afternoon well, this morning into this afternoon. And they're just older trees that were kind of rotting from inside, so.
Just wondering. Wasn't here for the storm.
Anything else? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. With nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Is there a second? Mrs. Thompson?
I'll second.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and second by Mrs. Thompson that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?